The F-89 Scorpion was the first of its kind. It was designed as an all-weather interceptor, with the objective of shooting down Soviet nuclear bombers before they could reach the U.S. After many years of false starts, crashes, and redesigns, it ultimately found its true purpose, becoming the first aircraft armed with an air-to-air nuclear missile. This weapon would leave no doubt if it came to bringing down a fleet of Soviet bombers. The Scorpion was paired with the Genie, considered the most powerful interceptor missile ever deployed by the U.S. Air Force. It was built to be so effective in destroying enemy bombers that no countermeasure could work against it. This extraordinary weapon was only launched once during a nuclear test in U.S. territory, over the heads of 6 men that lived to tell the story. The Scorpion. In August 1945, the U.S. Army Air Forces issued a specification for an all-weather interceptor that could replace the P-61 Black Widow. They required an aircraft with a top speed of 520 miles per hour and armed with aerial rockets that could be stored internally. The objective was to build a fighter jet that could intercept and destroy hostile aircraft under night and inclement weather conditions. One of the chosen designs was the N-24 by the Northrop Corporation. It had a slim body, a 2-man pressurized cockpit, and a conventional tailwheel-type landing gear. The first prototype flew on August 16, 1948, from Edwards Air Force Base. Soon after, its designation changed to XF-89. This initially simple aircraft faced several accidents that led to modifications over the years. When the Air Force conducted the first competitive evaluation of 3 different prototype proposals for all-weather interceptors, none of the pilots were impressed. They even graded Northrop's Scorpion low in ease of maintenance and cockpit arrangement. Disappointment ran so high that the pilots recommended developing the Lockheed F-94 Starfire as an alternative interim aircraft. However, the production of the F-89 continued because, from all the prototypes, it was the fastest and the only one considered a real fighter jet. The F-89 earned the nickname Scorpion thanks to its black color and high-mounted tail. It was a large and heavy aircraft with a distinctive main gear. In 1949, it was updated with removable wingtip fuel tanks and ailerons that acted as dive breakers. The second prototype required an almost total redesign. The new version had a pointed nose, upgraded engines, and permanently mounted wingtip fuel tanks. Instead of the black color that characterized the first model, this prototype had a natural metal finish. The XF-89A, as it was called, flew for the first time on November 15, 1949. History of accidents. In 1949, a prototype of the aircraft was used for the John Wayne movie Jet Pilot, which intended to show off the latest aircraft technology of the U.S. Air Force. The F-89 was used as one of the fighters shown in the last scenes of the movie. It was also one of the aircraft flown by the female protagonist in a test flight. The movie wasn't released until 1957, and by then, most of the technology shown was outdated. Shortly after its cameo, the prototype was involved in a mid-air collision with a DC-7B, which crashed into a schoolyard in Los Angeles, California. Both jets were in the middle of functional flight tests when they collided nearly head-on. On February 22, 1950, a couple of months after its inaugural flight, one of the other prototypes crashed due to a flutter problem that caused the entire tail to break off. Production was halted while engineering and wind tunnel tests were conducted to discover the cause of the crash. Northrop was able to rescue the Scorpion program by quickly modifying the engine exhaust and adding external balances that controlled the oscillations of the aircraft. The production of the Scorpion began later in 1950, and the next year it finally entered the U.S. Air Force with the 84th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Black Panthers. Although it was better than the Bravos aircraft previously used, the Scorpion was grounded for a year because of continuing structural issues with the wings and the engines. In total, 6 Scorpions crashed in 1952, and one of them in front of an audience watching an air show. A modification program was put in place to fit stronger wings into all models, which dramatically reduced the jet's accident rate. By 1954, all the F-89s had new engines and a better thrust level. This made them more reliable and allowed them to re-enter service. One of a kind. The definitive Scorpion was the F-89 Delta, which flew for the first time on October 23, 1959. It had the aerial rocket Mighty Mouse on each wingtip tank and a new radar. The most relevant change was that the guns on its nose were replaced with additional fuel tankage. The Delta successfully engaged with the Grumman F-6F-5K Hellcat drone. A total of 682 F-89 Deltas were produced. Some of them were used by Northrop as target drone launchers for the training crews of U.S. Army Nike surface-to-air missile sites. After several changes due to thrust deficiencies in service, 350 of the Deltas were eventually updated to the F-89J, a two-seat jet with a radar operator to guide the pilot. It had new wings, engines, landing gear, and wing nacelles. It had an increased fuel capacity and an additional radar. This updated version of the Delta became the first jet to carry an all-rocket armament and to be equipped with up to 4 U.S Falcon air-to-air guided missiles. The jet was able to locate and intercept any enemy aircraft during day or night, in spite of weather conditions. Even while its design is considered conventional for the time, it became truly innovative by being the first aircraft to carry the Genie, the world's first nuclear-armed air-to-air weapon. The Scorpion and the Genie were paired together for most of the early 1960s, but the weapon was only launched once. The final version of the F-89 served with the Air Defense Command as the first fighter interceptor to carry nuclear armament. Without their nuclear weapon, it later entered the Air National Guard and joined the semi-automatic ground environment air defense system. A total of 15 variants and 1,050 Scorpions were produced. Eventually, the F-89 was replaced by more modern aircraft like the F-4 Phantom and the Convair F-102. However, it is remembered for being the main U.S. air defense interceptor during most of the 1950s, and for never firing a shot in anger. Genie nuclear rocket. The F-89 was equipped with the aforementioned Genie, considered the most powerful interceptor missile that has ever been deployed by the U.S. Air Force. The Douglas Aircraft Company began developing the weapon, codenamed Ding Dong, in 1954. The objective was to build an unguided nuclear air-to-air weapon that could work against massed formations of high-speed bombers. The MB-1 Genie was introduced to the U.S. Air Force in 1957. It was armed with a 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead with a time-delayed detonation. It also had a flight time of 12 seconds that allowed it to cover over 6 miles. Its powerful motor enabled it to attack any aircraft that moved at high speed and altitude. The Genie would be extremely effective at destroying enemy targets, possibly even an entire bomber formation, thanks to its blast radius of almost 1,000 feet, and due to the fact that no countermeasure helped to avoid it. To safely escape after launching the warhead, the F-89 had to pull away in a sharp turn, which was a tricky maneuver to achieve with the aircraft. However, the timer for the aiming and detonation of the Genie would not begin until the rocket motor burnt out. This gave the aircraft enough time to run away from the blast radius. The rockets were carried for the first time by 15 F-89 interceptors deployed at Air Force bases in Michigan and outside San Francisco. Over 1,000 Genie rockets were produced until 1962. During this time, the rocket was only detonated once, during Operation Plum Bomb. It was later packed with tiny bomblets and converted to a conventional weapon capable of blowing up targets on the ground. In the 1970s, it was upgraded with a longer-lasting motor and then removed from the inventory a decade later. Interest in air-to-air nuclear missiles was short-lived. It was soon decided that launching a nuclear weapon required the approval of several high-ranking authorities in the White House and couldn't rely solely on a pilot's decision, which added unnecessary bureaucracy. Also, conventional air-to-air missiles were more reliable, and after the development of ballistic missiles, there was no need to carry nuclear weapons aboard planes. Ground Zero, Population 5. Operation Plum Bomb consisted of a series of controversial nuclear tests in the Nevada desert. The operation had several objectives, like conducting biomedical experiments, running safety tests, and improving weapons design. One of the most shocking tests, under the codename Shot John, was meant to prove to the American public the alleged safety of a low-grade nuclear exchange in the atmosphere. On July 19, 1957, 5 Air Force officers volunteered to stand under the detonation of a Genie rocket launched by an F-89 Scorpion. George Yoshitake was the Department of Defense photographer that filmed the event. He didn't volunteer like the other 5 men, and instead thought the job consisted of documenting the nuclear test from a distance. The night before his task, he found out he would actually be standing below the blast zone without any protective gear. In an interview with the Huffington Post, he recalled, quote, "I had a baseball hat, and I put that on, just in case." Wearing only their summer uniforms, the officers stood on a spot marked as Ground Zero, Population 5. A little after sunrise, the F-89 fired the almost 2 kiloton warhead, 1/8 the size of the A-bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion occurred at an altitude of 18,500 feet and ignited a bright light that shortly blinded the officers. Cameraman Yoshitake remembers that after the detonation, the officers congratulated each other on still being alive. One of them even passed around some cigars. The 6 men lived past the 1990s, and there's been no evidence of long-lasting effects on them after the detonation. However, in an interview with CBS, Yoshitake said that all of them were diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lives after the test.